Welcome. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We're really glad you're here. You probably heard the announcement, first hour. This class, we're about probably 8 months into it, but we had kind of three pretty distinct sections, and we're just getting ready to start the third section. So this is a really good time to break into the class. We spent the first couple of sections looking at Old Testament biblical passages. And there's a lot of politics that doesn't necessarily look like politics initially in the Bible, but we looked at Old Testament passages and then New Testament passages. And last week we finished up the book of Revelation. We spent 2 weeks looking at political implications of the book of Revelation. And today we're starting something new, and that is we're looking at how actual Christians in actual places have grappled with some of the very same issues that we grapple with in terms of how to live biblically, how to live faithfully in relation to earthly governments and earthly political situations. And so we're going to begin that this morning. So this morning is going to be a little bit more of an introduction. And I just wanted to introduce this morning, there's an author, he's a British historian named Tom Holland. He wrote this book, it's published 4 or 5 years ago. It's kind of a bombshell in the, at least in the world of popular historical writing. Tom Holland grew up pretty much his whole life as an atheist or agnostic. I think he went to the Anglican church as a boy, but left it by the time he was in junior high. But he said that he always had two fascinations as a boy. One, he was fascinated by dinosaurs, and the other thing he was fascinated with as a boy was the Greek and Roman period of history. So we're talking basically a couple hundred years before Jesus was born, during the life of Jesus, and a couple hundred years after Jesus was born. He wasn't interested in Jesus. He was interested in Greek and Roman history, and he said he came to realize he was interested in the Greeks and Romans for the same reason he was interested in dinosaurs, in that they were fierce and ferocious and glamorous and really interesting and also safely extinct. So you wouldn't really want to be dropped down in an environment full of dinosaurs in a time machine, right? Nor would you really want to be dropped down in an environment that's run by the Greeks and Romans. And he said he came to realize that for as much as the Greek and Roman period was this glamorous, exciting, fascinating time period, but he came to realize increasingly that they're so much unlike us in terms of how they saw the world. So for example, and so the thesis of his book is, you probably can't see the small print, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World. And the thesis of his book is that Jesus, when he came, his teaching and the teaching of his followers, the early church, released this slow motion underground atomic bomb that radically changed the course of the world, not in ways that were immediately obvious, but in ways that are unmistakable today. So, for example, he talks about Julius Caesar was the first, kind of considered the first Caesar of the Roman Empire. He lived about 40 years before Jesus, so he would have been Caesar when Joseph and Mary perhaps were young, or maybe even a little before they were born. Or you think of Anna and Simeon in the temple. They would have been in their prime when Julius Caesar became Caesar. This is an actual, we don't have photography obviously, but this was a bust that actually came from first century BC Rome. That's what he actually looked like. Caesar launched a war on, then they called them the Gauls. Today it's what we think of as France. And he defeated the Gauls, and he came back to Rome and had this massive victory parade with all of these Gauls in chains with hooks through their ears and noses, dragged along in triumph of his victory. And he had his people carry placards through the center of Rome saying, Caesar slaughtered 1 million Gauls and Caesar enslaved 1 million more. And everyone cheered and celebrated this slaughter and enslavement of the Gauls. And what Tom Holland says is, in modern day, it would be unthinkable for a prime minister in any country in Europe to hold a parade today boasting of slaughtering 1 million people and enslaving 1 million more. And he said, Tom Holland says, he came to increasingly realize that world is so alien from ours. Even today, secular people who are atheists, who are agnostic, who don't believe in Jesus, who don't believe in the Bible, but still think radically different than people in Caesar's time. And it's not an accident that we think so differently. What actually happened was Jesus. The Jesus revolution permanently changed the world and permanently changed how people think, even if they don't believe in Jesus. I've been reading a book this summer on the Comanches, and the Comanches were this Indian tribe in the southern plains. The Sioux kind of ruled the northern plains. The Comanches ruled the southern plains, and the Comanches were, my goodness, they took no prisoners. So when they went to war against other Indian tribes, the Apaches and the Kiowa, they slaughtered everyone. It's a Sunday school class, so we can't even talk about what they did, how they treated women, babies. And it's very reminiscent of the Romans, right? This is a people who are untouched by the gospel, untouched by the transformative message of Jesus. This is what you get when you have zero interaction with the teachings of Jesus and the gospel. So the thesis of the book Dominion is that Jesus, and Tom Holland still today, he's not made a profession of faith in Christ. I think he's close. It's really interesting because he's been an atheist his whole life. He says, I can no longer say that I'm not a Christian, but I can't yet say that I am a Christian. But he's been, just in studying history, it completely reshaped his thinking of why we live in the world that we live in today, right? So he says that Jesus, the life, and I don't know if he necessarily believes in the resurrection, but the teachings of Jesus, the life of Jesus, set off a massive, slow motion, underground atomic bomb, which is still reverberating throughout the world. So any thoughts about that?
Like only Jesus can do.
Right. Right.
In every realm,
Right.
He changes everything.
Yeah, and I think even people who don't believe in Jesus don't realize how much. So we're going to talk about this a little bit. Jesus really is king, like really truly is king of the whole world, and his kingdom really has changed the world, has changed everything, right? And so the world in which we live cannot unsee what we have seen with Jesus. We cannot go back to a place before the teachings of Jesus where we claim not to know what he has taught. So Tom Holland's thesis is that even our heresies in the West grow out of their Christian-shaped heresies because they grow out of a Christian soil, so to speak. So in other words, let me give you an example. Communism is a heresy that came out of where? The West. It came out of France, actually. France and Germany, and it spread spread throughout the world, but a communist doctrine is talking about lifting up the weak and bringing down the strong, right? That's a Christian-shaped heresy. Rome would have said, "You're weak, you want to be my slave? Get in line, you be my slave." Today, even the heresy of wokeness, right? We talk a lot about being woke. The woke heresy is a Christian-shaped heresy. The fact that we should bring up the weak and that and we should tear down the strong. That's something that Rome would have been completely unintelligible to the Greeks and Romans, right? Or the Comanches, or the Sioux. If you want to be my slave, fine, I will make you my slave, right? And so Roman men had the prerogative, Roman sexuality. Roman men could sleep with anyone, anywhere, anytime, at their choosing. Roughly a third of the Roman population was enslaved at the time of Christ, and it was just the way things were, right? And the key difference is nobody thought it was strange, right? Today, even if you would go to a non-Western communist country, they're going to say, they're going to speak the language of raising up the weak and tearing down the strong. That's a distinctly Christian-shaped heresy, because Jesus was the person in history who triumphed through the cross, right? Triumphed through his weakness, and that was a revolutionary idea that was brought by the gospel. So even our modern heresies are Christian-shaped heresies. Does that make sense? Thoughts? Yeah.
I have a question. I'm just wondering, okay, when did this atomic bomb start? Was it in the Old Testament times with Abraham? Is that when
Yeah.
it started? And is it in the scriptures like in Romans? Is that what it's talking about, that very thing in Romans?
No, you make a good point, because the bomb started when after Adam and Eve fell, right? And God said, "I'm going to restart this plan." Actually, we're going to talk exactly about this in just a second. But yeah, what Jesus did was not in opposition to the Old Testament. It was a fulfillment of the Old Testament. So you can look at the suffering servant in Isaiah, and all of this was predicted about Jesus before he lived, right? And even the Jews at Jesus' time struggled with, how can our Messiah be somebody who gets crucified on a tree? Like that's not what the Messiah is supposed to do. This is from Acts 17. This was the people in Thessaloniki who are complaining to their governor. They say, "These men, these Christians who have turned the world upside down, have come here also, and they're all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus." And so Jesus' teaching and message and life were received as a threat to the Roman Empire, because they were a threat to the whole system, right? Jesus wasn't going directly at Caesar and saying, "We're going to tear down Caesar," but Jesus' teaching undermined the whole system, right? That favored the strong and trampled on the weak, right? So why church history? Why would we study 2,000 years of Christians before us? This is Linus and Lucy. Is that? Or no, I'm sorry, Charlie Brown and I don't know. Sally, yeah. She's writing a school paper on church history, and she says, when writing about church history, we have to go back to the very beginning. Our pastor was born in 1930. Right? So sometimes when why would we study Christian history? Why would we study the history of the church? Why would we study the history of the church's relationship to society, to earthly governments and earthly societies? Well, can you think of any reasons why there might be some value in studying church history?
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to relive it.
Yeah, we try not to make similar mistakes, right? Who said that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, right?
Well, we're going off the same set of scriptures, and so I think sometimes we can feel like we are much more enlightened now than
Right.
years ago. But we're going off the same stories, the same scriptures,
Right.
so it's probably
Right.
a little frustrating.
Yeah, there's a strong modern bias, especially a Western bias, that we're the most enlightened people who ever lived, and people who lived before us are sort of living in darkness. But they had the same scriptures, they had the same Holy Spirit, they also had the ability to think. We can't even figure out how they build the pyramids, let alone without without modern equipment, let alone doing it without. So it's a bad bias that we have that people before us didn't think deeply about their Bibles and about truth and about their relationship with earthly governments. Another reason is God has been with us for 2,000 years in history, right? God, sometimes we think of history as just random stuff that happened, but again, in a sovereign universe, nothing is random, right? History has an author. Human history has an actual plot, an actual storyline. History is going somewhere. And actually God cares about actual people at actual times, at actual places, us, thankfully, but also people, Christians living 1,000 years ago. He cared about them and their situation, right? So we're not the first people to have interacted with God. Right?
When you can't sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning and you think about sovereignty, are you really feeling like God is sovereign?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you.
I don't always feel like God is sovereign. I have to remind myself often that he is sovereign, right? And sometimes I forget that he's sovereign. Yeah.
What exactly is sovereignty?
That's a good question. It means that nothing is out of God's control, right? God doesn't wake up and say, oops, I didn't realize that happened while I was asleep last night, right? God is, there's mysteries about God's sovereignty and human responsibility, which no Christians have ever solved and we won't solve either. But it is true to say that God is in control absolutely of this world and everything that happens. He's not a puppet master pulling strings. But there's nothing that happens where God says, oh, shoot, I wish. Now, there are lots of things that happen that weren't the will of God. If I walk up to you and punch you in the face and say, well, that happened, it must have been the will of God. It's not everything that happens, right, is orchestrated by God, but God is in control of it. Joseph is the perfect example, right? That mystery in human failure and sin and God's sovereignty and God's redemptive purposes to bring good out of human evil, right?
Zeke talked about that this morning with James. I mean,
Right.
when trials come in, that
Right.
temptation is our flesh.
Yeah.
Solzhenitsyn wrote 12,000 lines in the Gulag, wrote them, committed them to memory, and then put them on paper when he got out. I doubt if Joseph wrote that line when Potiphar's wife wanted to snuggle, or when his brothers threw him in the pit, and he was just waiting until the end of the book of Genesis to write it down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he managed to hold on to that in the prison, right?
I'm not even sure
Yeah.
he was as conscious of it
Right.
when he was in the thick
Right.
as he was when he saw what God had done. I mean,
Right.
surely he wasn't.
Yeah.
Surely.
Sure, he was. Is this true? Is God really in charge when I'm sitting in the? I've done everything right, and I'm sitting rotting in a Egyptian dungeon, right?
Even
Yeah.
John the Baptist.
Yeah. John the Baptist said, "Are you the Christ? Are you the one we've been waiting for?" Because it seems like not, right? Yeah. So we obviously can't be certain of everything in the past, but there's much that we can learn from the past. History teaches that we're not the center of the universe. Solomon said, "Nothing is new under the sun," right? Learning from history, every age has its own blind spots. We have blind spots, right? And so C.S. Lewis said, if we could read books from the future, that would be great, but we can't. We can only read books from the past. And that helps us expose some. Now, we can see their blind spots really easily, right? But they also can help us see our blind spots. And also, sometimes with Protestants, so Charlie Brown maybe thought history began in 1930, church history. Sometimes as Protestants, we think church history began in 1517 with the Reformation, right? But was the Holy Spirit on vacation for 1,500 years? I don't believe he was. He promised to be with the church, and I believe he was active among Christians for 1,500 years before the Reformation, and he's still active with us today.
What is Reformation?
The Reformation, good question. The Reformation was Martin Luther, when he led a movement to protest the abuses of the Catholic Church, and it really was a major turning point in church history, and it's where we get Protestants from. It's why today there's a Catholic Church and a Protestant church of the Reformation. Right? There was a reforming of the church in the 1500s. Right. So Tam, back to your question. It really does start back with Adam, right? So we could talk about political history before Jesus established the church in the book of Acts. And we can go back to Genesis 1 and 2, which we do that a lot around here, right? In Genesis 1 and 2, God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." And the very next sentence says, "And let them have dominion." So part of something about being made in the image of God involves us having dominion. That's a scary word. It's an unpopular word. What does it mean that we're in God's image and we have dominion? How do those things fit together, biblically speaking?
He's ultimately granted us authority over the realms of the earth as
Right.
he did us when he created us.
Yeah, God has authority. He's king over everything, but he has graciously chosen to share authority with human beings. And so when anyone creates something good or does something good, whether that's enacting legislation in your state legislature, or whether that's making a casserole and taking it to your next door neighbor, you're actually creating something, you're doing something that reflects the image of God, that is creating good and imaging God, reflecting God, and bringing good to bear on the environment around us, right? Maybe going to your job and doing a good job at your work, and that can be an act of exercising the dominion that you've been given over your sphere of influence, right? So even my kids have they have a very small realm of dominion, a small realm of influence, but I talk to my 7th grade son about you can be a positive influence, a force for good to the people around you. You don't have to go along with wrong. you can exercise influence for good. Doesn't mean that everybody's going to listen to you, but everybody has a realm of influence where they can exercise dominion that God has given them, right? And so dominion is part of our calling. Some of us are given, like the parable of the talents, right? Some people are given 10 talents, and some people are given 5, and some I've said this numerous times. I hope there's young people in this church who grow up to run for public office and become Supreme Court justices, and that their dominion will be expanded, and that they'll be able to do good in very large ways. But there's also lots of faithful ways. There's school teachers exercise dominion over, they have genuine influence over kids and their coworkers and their schools. That's an important form of dominion, right? And immediately after that it says, God said to them, to Adam and Eve, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And so dominion isn't domination. The context for this is a garden, right? And you don't exercise domination over carrots or onions. You nurture them, right? You're trying to get things. You're trying to bring life and care. That's what dominion is, right? God made us to image, to reflect His good reign into this world, and to bring fruitfulness and expansion of creativity and extending His good reign in the context that He puts us. So to cultivate and steward and shepherd in partnership with God. We are, lots of times through the Bible, if you start tracing this, lots of times we're called, well, I'll give you some examples, but we're called basically we're called to reign with Him. Now, the fall, Genesis 3, directly affects our dominion, right? Our dominion gets twisted and we become little tyrants, right? And we all know how that goes badly, but it doesn't nullify the original calling of Genesis 1 and 2. So, thoughts on that?
Churchill had a thought. He said, "It is not wrong to be a dragon. It's wrong to act like a dragon."
Yeah, our men's group went through a few years ago a book called Redeeming the Gift of Power. God has given each of us power, and we're even my fourth grader has a certain amount of power and influence. She could make life miserable if she wanted for people around her, right? Because God has given her a certain amount of power. And everyone is given power. And what do we use that with God for His kingdom, or do we use that to tyrannize other people, right? So God in Genesis, Genesis 1 and 2 is the creation. Genesis 3 through 11 is kind of one long fall narrative. It's lots of bad things happening. And in Genesis 12, God sets out a mission to restart His plan. And His plan was not merely to snatch out a small group of believers and then throw away the world like a styrofoam cup. Rather, God's plan is to redeem all things, right? To redeem and reign over all things. And that's what the book of Revelation points to, is not all physical earthly things thrown in the trash and burned. Peter does use the image of burning, but it's a burning like Noah's flood. Didn't annihilate the earth, it cleansed the earth. And so the final vision of Revelation 21 and 22 is not all Christians up in a floaty heaven and the world annihilated. The final vision of Revelation 21 and 22 is heaven coming down to earth, heaven and earth united, creation restored, as in Romans 8, right? And all people, again, I'm not need to reemphasize, I'm not talking about universalism. Everybody who's left, who has bowed the knee to Jesus, that's all that's going to be left is people who have welcomed the reign of God and are reigning with him forever. That is the destiny of this earth, is to be somehow remade in a new heavens and new earth, just like we will have new bodies that we don't know exactly the relationship between our earthly bodies and our new heaven, our heavenly bodies, but it's going to bear some relationship recognition to our earthly bodies now, right? I think I will recognize Ken and Greta. I think I will recognize you in heaven because I will somehow know, even though you'll have new bodies and I'll have new bodies, I'll have a new body. We'll know each other, right? Because we'll somehow be recognizable to each other. And the same thing is true for the new heavens and the new earth. Are going to have some way that we don't understand fully, but some continuity between this current earth and the new heavens and new earth. Does that make sense? That's not how we're often used to thinking of heaven. We're used to thinking of, because we've seen a lot of bad Far Side cartoons about people floating on clouds with harps and you can see through them. Well, that wasn't Jesus' resurrected body. Jesus made fish and they ate it together on a beach, right? And they recognized him. And he's the first fruits, the down payment for the redemption of our bodies, right?
And do you believe that currently creation is being restored currently as well?
That's a complicated question. I think, so what I do believe is that it is the job of believers now, because of what Jesus has done, to bring, I can fully live as a kingdom person now, right? So I live in a fallen world, a broken world. When you go out and farm, there's weeds that you're constantly fighting against. There's weather. And someday all of that resistance will be gone. But we can live as if God is present with us because he is present with us. We do have the Holy Spirit. The church is a miniature kingdom of God. It's like a people brought in a time machine from the future into this present broken world, right? So that's what we are. We are a future people. I don't mean, not trying to sound weird, but we have already been redeemed. We've already been given new life. New life doesn't start when we die. It starts when we come into Christ now and he comes into us. So we are living the kingdom. We're doing our best, and we're flawed people. We're not perfect, but we're doing our best to try to live out the kingdom now. And I think that involves trying to care for the people around us and the world as if they're going to be here forever, which they are. And so, we're trying to bring, through God's grace, we're trying to bring the benefits of the kingdom to bear now in this actual place. Does that make sense? Does that?
Yeah, I think it does make a difference how we think about that, because I mean, even within agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
the ability to continue to produce
Mm-hmm.
out of what God initially created.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and technology that we are developing
Mm-hmm.
that really is still coming from the core
Yeah.
that God created.
I think
Is, we use for good and bad.
I think that's a valid.
Sorry, I don't understand.
I don't either. No, I think that's a valid way to look at farming and agriculture. Is that's complicated because when do we tip over from human pride into and disconnecting from God, and just when does it become Babel, right? And where it's just human, because I can build this thing, I do. But I think if we try to stay connected to Genesis 1 and 2, that this bringing of life and fruitfulness and expansion is a very valid way to try to live out agriculture and education and any other realm of human endeavor, that we're trying to create good things in alignment with God's good plan from the beginning, right? Yeah, good question. Some passages that talk about this: Romans 8, Colossians 1, Revelation 5, Revelation 21. So, Tam, back to your good question. Israel's Old Testament history is not disconnected from its New Testament, from what Jesus came to do, right? God was doing something through history in the Old Testament to bring his rule to bear. And it's a long, twisty, bumpy road, but God starts his reign through a particular family, through a particular people, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And not because they were super virtuous. I mean, much of the stories of these people in the Old Testament are their failures, right? The story of Israel is largely a story of unfaithfulness and failure and setbacks. But because God promised that he was going to bring redemption to bear, and he's doing this through his promise to Abraham. But the very beginning, first promise that God makes to Abraham in Genesis 12, he says, I'm making you a blessing to be a blessing to the nations, not just to your particular tribe or clan or people. This is meant to be global from the beginning, right? And so God, it's a quick buzz through of pre-church history. God led Israel out of Egypt. For over 1,000 years, God was Israel's political leader. Israel they didn't have a theocracy for 1,000 years, but when God led them out of Egypt, he was their ruler, their king. And this is one of the first things he says to them as he brings them out of Egypt. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So even that's an echo of Genesis 1 and 2, that our destiny is to reign and to rule with God, to be his people. God gave Israel distinct laws and customs, and they weren't just religious customs, they were laws for all kinds of. If you strip out the things that are physical, tangible, like what to do with birds' nests and the planting of your crop, if you strip all that out of the Old Testament law, there's not very much left, right? So these were a whole constellation of laws over every aspect of life that was meant to set them apart from their neighbors. But here's the key I think we sometimes miss. The Old Testament laws were radically set them apart from the nations around them, the ancient civilizations. They stood out. Here's the key. They were meant to be on display before the nations. If you read through the Old Testament, it's constantly talking about their neighbors, their pagan neighbors were watching them. And if you start reading through the Old Testament looking for it, there's many, 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 many examples of pagans who are grafted into the nation of Israel, who become part of the people of God well before Jesus. And so, I'll give you some verses on this. Psalm 66 says, all the earth bows down to you. They sing praise to you. Come and see what God has done, his awesome deeds for mankind. So it's an invitation to the nations. It's not a coercion. Here's Isaiah 66. God says, I'm about to come and gather the people of all nations and languages, and they will come and see my glory. I will set a sign among them. I will send some of those who survive to the nations, to the distant islands that have not heard of my fame or seen my glory. They will proclaim my glory among the nations, and they will bring all your people from all the nations to my holy mountain in Jerusalem as an offering to the Lord. And I will select some of them, the nations, to be priests and Levites, says the Lord. As the new heavens and the new earth that I make will endure before me, declares the Lord, all mankind will come and bow down before me, says the Lord. This is the Old Testament. Right. Thoughts about this? This is it's a much more expansive view of what God's doing in the Old Testament than we typically think of. But again, God was redeeming a people, the nation of Israel, not just for themselves, but for his glory throughout the whole earth. He says, there's another verse, I think. But when you look at history this way, you see pharaohs and Caesars and kings who all get pulled in. We talk about God's sovereignty. God was sovereign over Pharaoh in Egypt, right? Pharaoh thinks he's the most powerful guy in the world. He's shown to be just a pawn, right? When God wants to mess with Caesar, he really messes with, Pharaoh. He really messes with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh can't do anything about it, right? So Israel isn't really the hero. God is, and God is constantly rescuing Israel from their failures to be what he's calling them to be, right? And then he's opening this invitation to the earth, to the nations. I love this verse. This is Isaiah 49. He says, listen to me, O coastlands. Give attention, you peoples from afar. Right? These are the nations. Right? The Lord called me from the womb, and he said to me, you are my servant, Israel, in whom I will be glorified. And now the Lord says, is it too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to bring back the preserved of Israel? I will make you, he's saying, that is too light of a thing. I will make you a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. Because God is worthy of being worshipped in every language, not just the Hebrew language, right? By all peoples, not just, it includes the Jews also, but they're the seed, and the fruit is the fruit of the whole nations. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Okay, we are to be, we need to be God's servant, basically, is what you're saying. That means let him work through you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's it? That's all we're called to do?
Well, I think we're called to live in the goodness of the gospel, what Jesus has done for us, to allow that to transform us. And that does transform our relationships. Right? The last verse that Zeke read for the benediction this morning was, you can't say, I love God, but I don't love any of these people around me. Right? That's not on the option on the menu, right? Right? So when we are transformed by the gospel, it absolutely transforms our relationships. It transforms our relation to governments, to my neighbors. It transforms everything, right? David is a key person in the Old Testament. He is a type or a prefigurement. That's the word that's usually used as a type, pointing forward to Jesus. David's a sinful man. He needs a Savior just like the rest of us. But God made a promise to David. He said, I will raise up your offspring after you. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. So this is a prophecy looking toward Jesus. But Jesus, we forget, he's not just, it's not going to be a spiritual floaty thing in the sky. Jesus actually reigns and rules. And someday that will be fully manifest on earth. Right now it's not as obvious as we would like it to be. But he reigns through his people. And someday, when heaven and earth are one, he's going to reign visibly on earth. Right? So throughout its history, Israel, in a really remarkable way, interacts with most of the great empires on earth, right? You see them interacting with Egypt and Assyria and Babylon and Persia and Greece and Rome. And God places his people often in the palaces of these people, right? Joseph is placed in Pharaoh's palace, and Daniel is placed in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus, and Esther is placed in the palace of, is it Ahasuerus or is it Darius? I can't remember. Yeah, and so not all of us are called to be in the halls of Washington, but some of us are, some Christians are, and the more the better, right? Many times God's plan seems to go hopelessly off track. Many times it seems like earthly empires are going to swallow up God's kingdom and derail God's mission of salvation. And in 586 BC, Israel as a nation is demolished and dragged off into slavery and exile, right, by Assyria and Babylon. And Israel is dispersed throughout the pagan nations. And even in the midst of that, Jeremiah, this is sort of an overview of the last 8 months. Jeremiah writes a letter to God's people in exile, and he says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile," whom I have sent, that's sovereignty words, right? Whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. This is what he tells them to do: build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce. So, construction, agriculture. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Have weddings, have wedding feasts. Right? Take wives for your sons, give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters, multiply there. Does that echo anything from earlier in the Old Testament? Right, it's Genesis 2 language, right? Multiply there and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. What city is he talking about? Babylon, right? Who just dragged them off in slavery, right? This is hard to live out if we actually try to apply it to here and now, right? To pray for the welfare of Babylon and seek its welfare. So this is a way of thinking that we're not used to thinking in, right? And this pattern is going to continue. I think we can demonstrate that in the New Testament. That this will be the model.
I think that's one of my favorite verses of the last couple of years.
Yeah.
From it, especially when you look at our nation that seems to be slipping certainly into less godly.
Yeah.
And it seems like we're clearly living in a more exile type. And it's really hard to figure out how to live then. Because I think that there is a switch of maybe 50 years ago to now.
Yeah.
To a degree.
Yeah.
And it's very clear in a passage like that we are to continue living.
Yeah.
And that's why I love Isaiah too, like all of the prophecies that have been fulfilled and documented in Isaiah. And then Revelations is the book of redemption, right? And it builds our trust. Like God is so compassionate to give us still prophecies that need to be fulfilled. There's so many that have been fulfilled through Isaiah. And that encouraged me to say, like, we can keep the faith and endure America today, because look at the prophecies we're working towards and what's already been fulfilled for the revelation of redemption.
Right.
Which is such a gift of kindness and compassion. Like, he didn't
Right.
have to do any of that for us. You know,
Right.
he could just say blindly believe.
Yeah.
And
And it's in a context of, the larger context wasn't a happy story. This is exile, right? This is defeat. This is a disaster, catastrophe, judgment. God said, I did this to you, right? Because of your sin. And yet, I'm going to redeem you out of this catastrophe that I have brought upon you, right? And Revelation is similar, right? There's this catastrophe of judgment, but out of it comes God's redemptive stream keeps flowing, right?
Nearly perfectly matches up with James 1 as well.
Yeah.
From a we're still to live in how we respond,
Right.
whether you're inside.
So we're about to look at a bunch of verses from the New Testament that I think completely echo this theme from the Old Testament. Yeah, Edna.
During that time when they were in Babylon, did they only take wives and of themselves, or do the Babylonians?
No, so that's the challenge. It's like, how do you maintain your distinctiveness as the people of God, right? So I think they were not to marry people who were not God followers, who are not, followers of Jehovah. Well, I say not Israelites. Moses married a non-Israelite. She was Egyptian. So you see intermarriage ethnically, but God does not approve of intermarriage. This person's a Christian, this person's a pagan. That's never approved.
But nation-wise.
Right.
Nation-wise.
Right, and it's that's a big theme. Idolatry is a big theme in the Old Testament, along with unfaithfulness, and part of the unfaithfulness of idolatry was marrying people, could be men or women, who don't follow God, who worship other gods, other idols, and then you become like them. You begin worshiping their idols. I don't think it's not an ethnic thing. It's a spiritual. It's a spiritual thing.
I bet there were Babylonians that saw those Israelites and thought, I want what they have.
There absolutely were.
They
Yeah.
wanted to be brought in.
Yeah.
And so there was a redemption for them, or
Yeah.
a salvation for them in that.
Yeah. If you start reading the Old Testament looking for it, there's constant examples of pagan peoples who are welcomed into the people of God and become God-fearers. I mean, the Old Testament law makes provision for these people by name, right? Interestingly enough, this side trail, but it shows up more with David than anybody else. Like when you look at David's defeats and failures, the people who stayed loyal to him were almost all non-Israelites, and they're commended for their. Some of them are Philistines, like some of his right-hand men who stuck with him when everybody else was trying to have him killed were actually Philistines. It's really fascinating if you look at these relationships. Now, most of the Philistines obviously were pagan, but God welcomes anybody who would follow him, right? So 70 years of exile, after which they return to the Promised Land. They don't have independence. They're under King Cyrus and King Darius of the Persians. They rebuild Jerusalem. That's what the books of Ezra and Nehemiah are about. And then we get this 400-year period of silence between, how are we doing on time? Between the Old and New Testament, basically 400 BC to when Jesus is born. In that time period, you have the rise of the Greeks and the Roman Empire, and Israel has a brief period of independence, but mostly is under the rule of other nations, under the coercion of other nations, pagan nations. And finally, when all looks lost and dark, the true king arrives, right? And Luke 1 says this, speaking of the king, he will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give to him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. So this is a primary point of this class, is that Jesus reigns, right? And Jesus as Savior and King over all things is not something new. Jesus is the fulfillment, the culmination, the pinnacle of God's mission throughout the Old Testament. Jesus saw himself as this fulfillment, and his followers did too. God establishes his reign over the church. You remember singing that song when you're in Sunday school, Father Abraham had many sons. I am one of them. Ethnically, no, I'm not a son of Abraham, but really and truly through Christ, I am a son of Abraham by faith, right? The church now lives under God's reign, and this is a link between the Old and New Testament. The church is on display, so to speak, the people of God in front of a watching world. They're invited to come in, right? To join God's good, to come under God's good and beautiful reign, right? So it's not enough. Jesus is rightful king over all the earth and will one day claim that throne and receive the joyful worship of all creation. That's Revelation 5. In the meantime, who we are, the church, not just our church, but the church meeting all over the world this morning. The church is a model, a miniature kingdom from the future, redeemed, put down in the midst of a fallen world, with still lots of rivals, lots of thorns and thistles, and pain of childbirth, and evil, and wars, and bad politics, and bad laws. But one day, all the earth is going to bow the knee joyfully to Jesus. Or face, there will be a period of judgment, and those who will not bow the knee will face judgment. Those who claim refuge under the cross will be all that's left, and will joyfully bow the knee to Jesus and confess that he's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so God reigns in the Old Testament, God is reigning in the New Testament. But this is a hard thing for us to get our minds around. But there's one God, one universe, one human race, and God has always been working through the history of this universe to bring his plan of redemption to fruition. Right? That plan runs continuously from Genesis to Revelation. The Old Testament continuously points forward to the New Testament, to the coming reign of the one true King. And this is something we say a lot around here, but the most important event in history, or series of events, was the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That is the focal point of all the hinge point of all history. Everything is different. It was the plan, it wasn't an accident, it wasn't random, it was the plan. But because of what Jesus did, everything is different, right? Any thoughts on this? I know this is like 8 months of fire hose. Yeah.
Speaking of our part in the world, live in a neighborhood where there's a poor part where people live, and I met this woman who was smoking, and every time I went by she was out. So I met her and stopped one day and started sort of ministering to her and helping her, and she's just had a stroke and no family, and she asked me not long ago, Susan, why are you doing this? It really came to her. Susan, you have no reason. And I said, it's because God wanted you to know how much he loves you. And I think that is, that's we are in the world. And when we act like the world wants to know why. Because before to me. And it just really spoke to me. And I said, thank you, Lord. We can be a light. And people will ask, what are you doing this for?
Right.
Because it's so different than the world.
Right.
And
So someone has said one of the greatest political arms of the church is our missions department, our missions and outreach, right? Because really, that sounds like a facetious thing to say, but it's not. It's spreading the good news that Jesus reigns, that you can be invited into that. You can come under the good, beautiful reign of Jesus, right?
And then it changes generations,
Right, right. And that is what actually changes the world. So that kind of goes to the next point. Human societies have all kinds of plans for reformation apart from God. They're not going to work apart from God. They're not going to work until we're aligned with the kingdom of God and the teachings of Jesus. They're going to be futile, right? Because this is what we were made for, is to live under the good and beautiful reign of God, right? The most important events of history are not what they seem to be, the next election, or even what happens to the United States, or what's happening in Russia, or China, or wherever, right? The most important thing in the universe is the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and the after effects of his teaching and his kingdom as it expands, right? We're out of time. Any final thoughts?
The thought I had, you almost hit it there, was if you went back several months, you start to talk about prophecy and what's coming up, and people get so focused on that, but the most important part of our history in the world already happened.
It already happened, yeah. We already get to live in not all of the blessings, but the most important ones. Like the Holy Spirit lives in us. The Old Testament believers didn't have that, right? We have God's Word. The Old Testament believers didn't have that. We have the knowledge, the experience of what Jesus did. Yeah. And if the world goes on for another 2,000 years, nobody's going to improve upon that. Right? There won't be any improvements over what Jesus. There's nothing better coming along than what Jesus already did. Right? All right. Well, I don't know exactly how we're going to do this because I only got through about half of the notes, and Elliot graciously agreed to teach this class for me next week because I'll be doing the sermon. So, Elliot's not here? Oh, there he is. So, we'll have to figure this out because I didn't get through this week's notes yet. But the plan is, we'll have to see. But the plan was to basically pick up from the book of Acts, the ending of Acts, and go through about the first 300 years of the church up into Constantine. Constantine is maybe you've heard of that name, maybe you haven't. He's a kind of a fork in the road moment for the church. So we're not going to talk about Constantine next week, but we're going to talk about the birth and the growth of the early church between Acts and Constantine, and look at how these Christians actually tried to live out these same things in their context. So, Mark, would you close us in prayer?